They say the happiest moments of your life become the most painful memories. That's how I feel when I think about the day I met Jennifer. It was a warm spring afternoon in New York City. I was grabbing coffee at a small, bustling cafe when she walked in, all energy and light. Her smile lit up the room, and for a moment, the city noise faded into the background. Jennifer was magnetic, the kind of woman who drew people in without even trying. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she talked to you. We started dating a few weeks later, and it felt like I'd hit the jackpot. She was everything I thought I wanted. Smart, funny, ambitious. We talked about our dreams, our fears, and our future. It all seemed so perfect back then. After a year of dating, I proposed. The memory still feels surreal. Me, on one knee in Central Park, surrounded by cherry blossoms, and her, with tears in her eyes as she said yes. Those were the happiest days of my life. But happiness is fragile. Over time, it began to crack, then shatter. I didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, like a faint hum in the background that you only hear when everything else is silent. Jennifer grew distant. The woman who once laughed at all my jokes now seemed to find me tiresome. I told myself it was stress, that she was just going through a rough patch. I wanted to believe that so badly. Looking back, I realized those were the first signs. But love makes you blind, and I was no exception. I still saw her as the woman who had said yes in Central Park, not the stranger she was becoming. It started with little things. Things that didn't make sense but were easy to brush off. Jennifer would come home late from work, claiming she had meetings that ran overtime. She'd spend hours on her phone, texting with a slight smirk on her lips, and when I asked who it was, she'd say, "Just a friend." That was the first red flag, but I ignored it. Her laughter, once so effortless around me, became rare. Conversations we used to have about life, our dreams, even mundane things like what to eat for dinner, started to feel strained. I told myself relationships go through phases, that this was normal. But deep down, something felt off. One night, as we sat at the dinner table in silence, I decided to break the tension. "Jen, is everything okay? You've been distant." She looked at me, her fork hovering midair, and gave me a small, tired smile. "I'm fine, Mike. Just stressed, that's all." I wanted to believe her, but her tone was flat, devoid of the warmth I used to know. I didn't push her. Maybe I should have. A few weeks later, she brought it up herself. "I don't feel like myself anymore," she said, her voice trembling slightly. We were sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on her face. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart sinking. "I feel trapped, like I'm losing who I am." It hit me like a punch to the gut. "Trapped? By me?" "No," she said quickly, but the hesitation in her voice told a different story. "By life, by routine. I need something to make me feel alive again." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my head. What did she mean by alive again? Wasn't I enough? Weren't we enough? Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were having coffee in the kitchen. Out of nowhere, she said, "Mike, what if we tried something different? Something unconventional?" I raised an eyebrow. "Unconventional how?" She hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee mug. What if I slept with someone else? Just once." The room went silent. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she was joking, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't. I don't understand," I finally managed to say. "It's not about you," she said quickly, desperation creeping into her voice. "It's about me. I feel invisible, Mike. I need to feel wanted, to feel desirable. Just once." My hands were shaking as I set my mug down. "Do you have someone in mind?" Her silence was deafening. Her silence felt like a blade pressing against my chest. Jennifer didn't look at me. Instead, she stared at her coffee as though it held the answers to questions she wasn't ready to face. The air between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words and accusations. "Do you?" I repeated, my voice sharper now. "Do you already have someone in mind?" She finally met my eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw guilt flash across her face. But she quickly masked it with a calm I didn't recognize. "No," she said softly. I'm just thinking out loud. That's all." But her words didn't feel like the truth. They felt rehearsed, like something she'd prepared in case this moment ever came. I wanted to press her, to demand answers, but a part of me was terrified of what I might uncover. So I did what I thought was best at the time. I dropped it. But the conversation lingered. It followed me through the days like a shadow, whispering doubts into my ear. Why would she even suggest something like that? And why now? Jennifer's behavior only fueled my paranoia. She started spending even more time on her phone, always careful to angle the screen away from me. When I asked her about it, she'd shrug it off. "It's just work," she'd say, or, "It's nothing important." One night, as she slept beside me, I couldn't resist the urge any longer. I reached for her phone on the nightstand, my hands trembling. But it was locked, and I didn't know the passcode. My stomach churned as I realized just how little I knew about her life anymore. The next day, I made a decision that felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. I installed a small device on her phone, a listening device. I hated myself for it, hated the invasion of her privacy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. First, there was nothing. Days passed, and all I heard were mundane conversations, work calls, chats with friends, nothing unusual. For a moment, I thought I was losing my mind, that I'd let my insecurities spiral out of control. But then, one night, I heard it. The sound that shattered everything I thought I knew. Started faintly, like the rustling of fabric. Then came the muffled voices, Jennifer's and Amanda's. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Intimate, familiar. And then, the sound that made my blood run cold. Her voice, breathless and unrestrained, followed by his. I ripped the earbuds out of my ears, my hands shaking so violently I could barely breathe. My mind raced, replaying what I'd heard over and over again. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. She had already crossed the line she'd so casually suggested that day in the kitchen. The betrayal hit me in waves. First disbelief, then rage, then a hollow, aching sadness. I sat there in the dark, staring at the device that had just destroyed my world. A part of me wanted to confront her right then, to shake her awake and demand answers. But another part of me, colder, more calculating, knew I needed more. I needed to know who he was. The next morning, the world felt different. The sun rose, the city buzzed as it always did. But for me, everything had shifted. I watched Jennifer move around the house as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't torn my life apart in the dead of night. Her laughter over the morning news felt cruel, her casual goodbyes hollow. As soon as she left for work, I opened my laptop and started researching. The man's voice from the recording haunted me. Who was he? How long had this been going on? My hands shook as I sifted through our shared accounts, looking for anything suspicious. Unusual transactions, hidden email addresses, anything that might give me a clue. But Jennifer was careful. Too careful. I found nothing. That's when I decided to follow her. I told myself it was the only way to uncover the truth, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was consumed by an obsession, a need to know every detail of her betrayal. It started with small things. I'd leave work early to park near her office, watching from a distance as she left the building. Most days she went straight home, but sometimes she'd stop at a cafe or a bar, always looking over her shoulder, as if she knew someone was watching. And then it happened. It was a Friday evening. Jennifer had told me she'd be working late, but I knew better. I waited outside her office, my heart pounding in my chest, as she emerged into the cool night air. She didn't head to the parking lot. Instead, she walked briskly down the street, her heels clicking against the pavement. I followed her at a safe distance, weaving through the crowd. She stopped in front of a sleek black car parked outside an upscale restaurant. A man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, with a cocky smile that made my blood boil. They embraced, not like colleagues or casual friends, but like lovers. I gripped the steering wheel of my car so tightly that my knuckles turned white. It was him, The voice from the recording had a face now. He opened the car door for her, and they drove off, leaving me sitting in the dark, consumed by rage and disbelief. I followed them to a hotel just outside the city. They disappeared inside, arm in arm, leaving me in the parking lot, staring at the glowing sign above the entrance. The urge to storm in, to confront them, was overwhelming. But I held back. I needed to think. That night, I didn't go home. I parked outside the hotel, staring at the windows, wondering which one belonged to them. My mind raced with scenarios, confrontations, revenge, even violence. But none of it felt real. It felt like I was living someone else's life. When Jennifer came home the next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, her smile warm and genuine. It was a performance, and I hated how convincing it was. But now I had a name. Josh. Josh. Just one name, yet it carried the weight of my unraveling life. Who was he? What gave him the right to step into my world, my marriage, and destroy it? That Sunday morning, while Jennifer was in the shower, humming some forgettable tune as if she hadn't spent the night with another man, I began my search. I typed his name into every platform I could think of: social media, professional networks, even old-school phone directories. It didn't take long. Josh Taylor. His profile popped up on LinkedIn, his smug, confident face staring back at me through the screen. He was an attorney, specializing in corporate law, based in Manhattan, married with 2 kids. The words "family man" stared at me mockingly, a cruel joke considering what I now knew about him. I clicked through his profile, every detail fueling my growing hatred. Photos of him with his wife, smiling at black tie events. Pictures of his kids on family vacations, their innocent faces oblivious to the kind of man their father really was. I scrolled further, finding connections to Jennifer. They'd worked together briefly a few years ago on a corporate project. That must have been where it started. My stomach churned as I imagined their first meeting, their secret glances, the slow build of something I had been blind to. I needed more. Over the next few days, I delved deeper into Josh's life. His firm had a public directory with his contact information. His wife, Claire, was an interior designer with her own website. The kids, Emily and Noah, attended private school, their names listed in a local charity newsletter. The more I learned, the darker my thoughts became. Josh wasn't just sleeping with Jennifer. He was living a double life, lying to his family just as much as he was helping destroy mine. But I wasn't just angry at him. I was furious with Jennifer. How could she do this? How could she betray not only me but also the values we'd built our marriage on? One night, as Jennifer slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with plans. Confronting her felt too simple, too easy. She needed to feel what I was feeling, the humiliation, the rage, the hopelessness. And Josh? He deserved to lose everything he thought he'd secured so neatly in his double life. I printed every piece of evidence I'd gathered so far. Photos of Jennifer meeting Josh, emails I'd hacked from her account, even a few damning conversations I'd recorded. I organized everything into a folder labeled Truth. But the most chilling part of it all was how calm I felt. The storm of emotions that had consumed me days ago was now replaced with a cold, methodical focus. I wasn't just a man betrayed. I was a man with a plan. The folder of evidence sat in my desk drawer like a loaded gun. Every night, I opened it, staring at the damning proof of Jennifer's betrayal and Josh's deceit. Each piece felt like a puzzle coming together, but instead of satisfaction, it brought a deep, gnawing emptiness. Jennifer's behavior grew more predictable. She'd leave for work in the evenings, her excuses flimsy and repetitive. I didn't challenge her anymore. Instead, I let her believe I was as blind as she wanted me to be. That made it easier to track her movements, easier to anticipate her lies. One Thursday, I followed her to the same hotel again. It was becoming their routine, their twisted sanctuary. From the parking lot, I watched them meet, her hand slipping into his as they walked inside. The sight should have hurt, but I was numb now. The pain had transformed into something sharper, more deliberate. I decided to follow Josh after he left Jennifer. I trailed his car back to a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind with picket fences and well-manicured lawns. His house was large but unassuming, with warm lights glowing in the windows. Through the gaps in the curtains, I saw his wife, Claire, setting the dinner table. She moved with an ease that Jennifer had lost long ago, her smile genuine as their 2 kids ran into the room. Josh walked in moments later, kissing Claire on the cheek as if he weren't carrying the stench of my wife on him. It was surreal watching him slip so effortlessly between lives. It made me sick. I stayed outside his house for hours, my mind racing. What would happen if I knocked on that door and handed Claire the folder of evidence? What would she do if she knew the truth? But something held me back. Not pity. Not for Josh and certainly not for Jennifer. But the realization that this wasn't enough. Exposing them wouldn't fix what was broken inside me. It wouldn't undo the betrayal or erase the humiliation. I needed more. The next day, I requested time off from work. My boss, noticing the strain in my voice, didn't ask questions. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. Back at home, Jennifer was growing bolder. She no longer bothered to hide her late-night texts or the small, secretive smiles she thought I didn't notice. She was slipping further away from me, and she didn't even care. One evening, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I said, "Do you ever feel like we're losing each other?" She looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we don't talk like we used to. You're always busy. It feels like you're not here anymore." Her eyes softened, but it felt like pity, not love. "Mike, I'm just tired. Work has been crazy. I'm sorry if I've been distant." Lies, every word. But I nodded, playing my role in her theater of deception. "I get it," I said. "Maybe we just need a break. A weekend away, just the 2 of us." Her hesitation was subtle but unmistakable. "Maybe," she said, her smile forced. "Let's talk about it later." That was when I knew. She wasn't just slipping away. She was gone. Jennifer's dismissive, "Let's talk about it later," echoed in my head for days. It wasn't just rejection, it was a declaration. She'd already moved on emotionally, her loyalty no longer tethered to our marriage. If I needed confirmation, it came the following week. I overheard her on the phone in the kitchen, her voice hushed but unmistakably excited. "I can't wait to see you," she said, a flirtatious lilt in her tone. My stomach churned, but I stayed quiet, listening from the shadows like a ghost in my own home. After she hung up, she seemed lighter, almost glowing. I felt a cold, bitter rage rise in me. How could she look so happy when I was drowning in the weight of her betrayal? That night, as Jennifer slept, I sat in the living room, staring at the folder of evidence. I collected everything I needed to destroy her world, but I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. This wasn't just about exposing her and Josh. It was about making them feel the weight of what they'd done. I started planning. The first step was gathering more information. I began tracking Jennifer's movements more closely, noting every detail of her routine. I knew when she left, where she went, and how long she stayed. I even followed Josh a few times, learning his patterns. The second step was subtle manipulation. I started leaving small hints for Jennifer. Nothing overt, just enough to make her question herself. I'd move her phone charger to a different room or leave her favorite coffee mug in the sink when she swore she'd washed it. She began to look at me differently, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. One evening, as we ate dinner in silence, I asked casually, "Do you ever feel like you're being watched?" She froze, her fork hovering midair. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said with a shrug. "Sometimes it feels like someone's following me. Probably just my imagination." Her laugh was forced, nervous. "You're paranoid, Mike." But her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her glass of wine. The third step was preparing for the final act. I started meeting with a divorce attorney, laying the groundwork for what would come next. I wanted to make sure everything was in place before I confronted her. At the same time, I began crafting my revenge on Josh. I found his office address, his gym, even his favorite coffee shop. I started leaving anonymous notes in his mailbox. Cryptic messages like, "You can't hide forever," and "She knows." I knew it wouldn't take long for the paranoia to set in. People like Josh thrive on control, and the idea of losing it terrifies them. Jennifer remained oblivious, caught up in her web of lies. She didn't notice the shift in me, the way I'd stopped trying to win her back or fix our marriage. I no longer cared about her love or her excuses. I cared about one thing: retribution. Jennifer's composure began to waver. The small manipulations I'd planted in her routine were taking root. She started misplacing things more often, double-checking the locks on the doors, and glancing over her shoulder when she thought I wasn't looking. Her once flawless mask of confidence now showed faint cracks, and I savored every one of them. One evening, as she sat at the dining table scrolling through her phone, I leaned against the doorway and asked, "Rough day?" She jumped, nearly dropping her phone. "Yeah," she said quickly, her voice strained. "Work's been stressful." "Really?" I said, my tone light. "I thought you loved your job." "I do," she said, but the words sounded forced, almost robotic. I could see it in her eyes. She was starting to question herself. Good. That was the goal. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to Josh. The anonymous notes I'd been leaving were working. He was becoming increasingly paranoid, checking his surroundings every time he stepped out of his car, glancing over his shoulder on the way into his office. I followed him to the gym one evening and watched as he cut his workout short, leaving in a rush after receiving a text. But it wasn't just his behavior that was changing. It was his relationship with Jennifer. Their once easy meetings were becoming more strained. One night, I listened to a recording of their conversation in his car outside the hotel. "Something's off," Josh said, his voice tense. "I keep getting these messages. Someone knows, Jen." Jennifer laughed nervously. "You're overreacting. No one knows." "I'm not overreacting," he snapped. "What if it's Mike?" Jennifer paused. "Mike? No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's oblivious." Her words stung, but they also fueled my determination. By now, I had everything I needed. The folder of evidence was complete. My legal preparations were in place, and both Jennifer and Josh were unraveling under the weight of their own guilt and fear. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I began planting seeds of doubt in their relationship. I created a fake social media account and started messaging Jennifer, posing as an anonymous informant. "Do you really think he's only seeing you?" I wrote. "Josh has a reputation, you know." At first, she didn't respond. But after a few days, her demeanor changed. She became more withdrawn, more irritable. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, her phone buzzed with a message. She picked it up quickly, her face pale as she read. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern. "Yeah," she said, her voice shaky. "Just work." Her lies were becoming sloppier, and I could see the cracks widening. Josh wasn't faring much better. I intercepted a phone call between him and Jennifer. "I think someone's following me," he said, his voice edged with panic. "This has to stop, Jen. It's not worth it anymore." "Are you saying I'm not worth it?" She shot back, her tone defensive. "This isn't about you," he snapped. "This is about my life falling apart because of this mess." Hearing their relationship start to crumble brought me a twisted sense of satisfaction. They'd built their connection on lies and betrayal, and now it was collapsing under its own weight. But the endgame was still ahead. The final move, the one that would leave them both with no way out, was coming. The time had come. I'd spent weeks orchestrating this moment, meticulously laying the groundwork for the confrontation I'd been preparing for. Jennifer's cracks had deepened, and Josh's paranoia was starting to spill over into his real life. Both of them were hanging by the thinnest of threads, and now I was ready to pull. I knew Jennifer had a meeting with a client one afternoon, so I planned my attack. It was the perfect opportunity to put the final pieces into motion. I spent the morning sitting in my car outside Josh's office, waiting. The hours felt like days as I watched him walk in and out of the building, his usual confident stride replaced with something more erratic. He looked over his shoulder several times, clearly feeling the pressure. I didn't need to get closer. I could sense the weight of his guilt from here. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Jennifer had texted me, her message terse and detached. "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." I knew exactly where she was headed. She was meeting him again. I drove home, the knot in my stomach tightening with every mile. The house was eerily quiet when I stepped inside, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. I had no idea how she would react, but I knew this was the moment when everything would change. I took the folder from my desk drawer and laid it on the kitchen table. The papers were thick, heavy with proof of her infidelity. Every photo, every recording, every message. It was all there. The truth, raw and undeniable. I made sure the house was locked down, no distractions, no interruptions. I needed Jennifer to be alone when I confronted her. When she came back, she would have nowhere to hide. The hours dragged on. I poured myself a drink, watching the clock tick, knowing that the confrontation would either destroy our relationship completely or give me the satisfaction of knowing I had finally broken her. Around 8 p.m., I heard the front door open. My heart raced. Jennifer walked in, her steps sluggish, tired. She barely looked at me as she hung up her coat. "I'm home," she said, her voice almost apologetic. I didn't speak at first. I just watched her, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. Finally, I stood up, the words I'd rehearsed over and over ready to spill. "How long, Jennifer?" I asked quietly, my voice steady but cold. "How long have you been lying to me?" Her eyes darted around the room, refusing to meet mine. "What are you talking about?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I picked up the folder and slid it across the table to her. The sound of the papers shifting was loud in the quiet room. "Take a look," I said. "This is everything. All the lies. All the proof." Jennifer's face drained of color as she hesitated, her hand hovering over the folder. I could see her pulse racing, hear the slight tremor in her breath. She was cornered. There was nowhere to run. With shaking hands, she opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the pages, flicking from one photo to the next, one message to the next. The reality of her betrayal hit her like a wave. She couldn't escape it. "Mike," she whispered, her voice weak, barely a whisper. I never meant for this to happen." I leaned in closer, my voice low and cutting. "But it did, didn't it? You've been sleeping with him. All this time. You made a choice, Jennifer. And now you'll face the consequences." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I had no sympathy left for her. She looked at me, desperate. "Please don't do this. Please, Mike. I love you. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "It's a little too late for apologies, don't you think?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, her touch feeling like poison. "You're sorry now? After everything? After months of lies?" I don't know what to say," she said, her voice cracking. "I've been lost. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I wanted to feel alive again." The irony of her words hit me like a slap. She hadn't been looking for life. She'd been looking for an escape, a way out of the life I had built for us. But she hadn't considered the consequences. I stood up, pacing the room, the anger simmering beneath my skin. "I've been patient. I've been trying to understand you, to be there for you. But this is something I can't forgive." Jennifer's sobs filled the room, but they didn't move me. There was no more compassion left in me. Only anger, only a cold resolve. "Mike, please, don't do this. You can't just—" I cut her off. "It's done, Jennifer. I'm done. And so is this marriage." The room was suffocating. The silence after my words seemed to stretch on forever, and Jennifer's sobs only made it worse. She crumpled to the floor, clutching her chest, as though her heart was being torn out. But I didn't feel the relief I'd expected. I'd hoped that confronting her would bring clarity, but all it did was open up a deeper wound that I couldn't heal. Her words were barely coherent as she pleaded, "Mike, please, don't do this. We can fix this. We can work through it. I swear. I love you." I looked at her, kneeling there, broken, but I wasn't moved by her theatrics. She had destroyed everything that had mattered to me, and now, she wanted to sweep it under the rug with empty words. "You don't love me," I said, my voice cold and detached. You love the idea of me. You love the comfort, the security, but not the man who's standing in front of you now. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she wiped her tears. That's not true, Mike. I never meant to hurt you. I was lost. I didn't know what to do anymore. I shook my head slowly, unable to comprehend how she could justify any of it. You didn't know what to do? You're telling me you didn't know what you were doing when you laid down with him? When you lied to me every day? Her sobs increased in intensity, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no desire to comfort her. I had given her everything. My trust, my love, my loyalty, and she had thrown it all away. I turned my back to her, walking over to the window. The hardest part, I said quietly, is that I don't even know who you are anymore. The woman I married wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have betrayed me like this. Jennifer stood up shakily, wiping her face, her voice breaking as she tried to reach me. Mike, please, you can't just throw everything away because of one mistake. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance to prove it to you. I didn't turn to face her. I didn't need to see her pleading expression to know what she was trying to do. She was trying to salvage what was left of our marriage, but there was nothing left to salvage. It's not a mistake, Jennifer, I said quietly, finally turning to face her. It's a choice. You chose him over me. You chose a lie over everything we had. And now you'll have to deal with the consequences. Her face twisted in anguish. What do you want from me, Mike? What do you want me to do? I stepped closer, my voice lowering to a whisper. I want you to face the truth. I want you to admit that you destroyed this, that you've been lying to me for months, maybe even years. And then I want you to leave. Jennifer stumbled back as though I had slapped her. She looked as if I had ripped the world out from under her, and maybe, in a way, I had. She couldn't comprehend how deep the betrayal had cut, how far gone I was. You're kicking me out? She whispered, disbelief in her voice. I nodded. Yes, I don't want you here anymore. You've destroyed what little respect I had left for you. For a moment, Jennifer just stood there, silent, her face a mask of shock and pain. Then, with one final, broken sob, she turned and walked out of the room. I heard her packing in the bedroom, her movements frantic, filled with desperation. But I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel sad, angry, or relieved. I just felt empty. The sound of the front door closing behind her echoed in the house like a death knell. It was over. The house was eerily quiet once she was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door she'd just walked through. The weight of what had just happened settled on my chest, but there was no sense of victory, no sense of relief. Instead, all I felt was an overwhelming emptiness. Jennifer had left, but it wasn't just her body that was gone. She had taken something from me that I couldn't get back. My trust, my faith in love, and in people. I moved through the house like a shell, mechanically doing the things that needed to be done. I cleaned up the kitchen, put the dishes away, and checked my phone, only to see a few missed calls from her. I didn't answer. There was no point in pretending I cared anymore. The woman I had loved, trusted, was gone, replaced by someone who had deceived me, betrayed me in the most painful way possible. But there was one thing left to do, one final act of closure that would bring the last bit of this twisted story to an end. I pulled out the file once again, the one I'd kept hidden for so long. The photos, the recordings, the messages. I'd kept them for one purpose, to expose her, to make her pay for what she'd done. But now I realized something. I didn't need to use them. The pain had already been inflicted. I didn't need to destroy her more than I already had. Instead, I sent one final message. Not to Jennifer, but to Josh. The text was simple, straightforward, yet it felt like the culmination of everything I'd been holding inside. I know what you've been doing. I know about you and Jennifer. You've both destroyed lives. I've given her what she deserves. But you're next. I didn't care what he thought. I didn't care if he was terrified, if he felt the weight of his own guilt. The only thing that mattered now was that I had taken control of the situation. I had stopped being the passive participant in their game. I sat down at the kitchen table, the empty house pressing in on me. Jennifer was gone, but so much had changed in me. I wasn't the same man I had been when I walked into this marriage. I had been torn apart, but now I was something else. Someone who had seen the ugliest parts of the people he loved. And I had survived it. But survival wasn't enough. I needed to rebuild. Not my marriage, not with Jennifer, but with myself. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the contacts. There were people I had ignored, friends I had pushed away. It was time to reconnect. It was time to stop pretending that I could fix what was broken and start the long process of healing. I made a decision. I would focus on myself. Not on revenge. Not on the pain. But on reclaiming the pieces of myself that Jennifer had taken. The journey wouldn't be easy. There would be days when I would doubt myself, when I would wonder if I could ever trust again. But I knew that, for the first time in a long time, I had taken control of my life. And that, in itself, was enough. It's strange, the way time moves after everything shatters. At first, the silence is suffocating, and the weight of the emptiness settles in like a heavy fog. But eventually, you start to breathe again. Slowly at first, as if your lungs had forgotten how to work. Then, after a while, the fog begins to lift, and you start to see the pieces of yourself scattered around you. I didn't expect to feel the way I did once Jennifer was gone. In the beginning, there was anger, then confusion, followed by moments of almost unbearable sadness. I wasn't sure what I wanted or even what I was supposed to feel. I had been hurt beyond words, yet I had a strange sense of release. Without her, the house felt like a shell. It was as if she had taken all the life and warmth with her. I spent the first week in a daze trying to numb myself with distractions. Work, gym, anything to fill the void. But when the distractions ran out, the truth hit me harder than ever. I was alone. I knew I couldn't stay in this house forever. There were too many memories here, too many echoes of what had been, what I had lost. So I made a decision. I would move. I didn't know where yet, but it didn't matter. I just needed a change, a fresh start. I started looking for places online, my mind half focused on the task at hand. I toured a few apartments, but nothing felt right. The thought of being surrounded by the same walls, the same rooms without her was unbearable. One day, I came across a house. A small, modest place on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything special, but something about it called to me. The quiet neighborhood, the small yard, the view of the mountains in the distance. It felt like a place where I could start over. I called the agent the next morning. The process of moving was both cathartic and painful. I went through the motions, packing up our life in boxes. The framed pictures of our wedding, the trinkets we had collected over the years, the notes she had left me. It all went into boxes, and each item felt like a small piece of the past that I was trying to bury. But there were things I couldn't bury, no matter how hard I tried. The memory of her voice, the way she used to laugh, the little things that made me fall in love with her in the first place. They were still there, haunting me, even in the empty rooms of the house. I moved into the new place with only the bare essentials. I didn't need much. The emptiness was comforting for a while. It was as if I was resetting my life, making space for something new, even though I wasn't sure what that would be yet. Over the next few months, I focused on getting back to myself. I spent time with friends I had neglected, reconnected with family, and started finding peace in the small moments. Reading a book on the porch, cooking dinner for myself, walking in the quiet streets of my new neighborhood. But there was still something missing. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe for the anger to fade, for the pain to subside, for the person I used to be to return. But that person was gone, and I realized, perhaps for the first time, that I didn't want him back. I had become someone else, stronger, more aware of the world's cruelty, but also more appreciative of the beauty in the small, quiet moments. I had survived the worst, and I was beginning to understand that the only way forward was to stop looking back. One evening, as I sat in the small living room of my new home, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. I had no idea what the future would hold. I didn't know if I would ever love again or if I would ever truly trust anyone. But I knew I would be okay. I was learning to rebuild, piece by piece, until I was whole again. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. It's funny how life can surprise you when you least expect it. You think you have everything figured out. Everything is neatly compartmentalized, your wounds carefully tucked away, and the quiet life you've built for yourself is enough. But then, out of nowhere, life drops something or someone into your path, and you're forced to face the things you've been trying to avoid. It happened one evening in the small local coffee shop I'd been frequenting. I wasn't looking for anything, let alone someone to stir up emotions I thought I had long buried. But there she was. I was sitting by the window, lost in a book, when the bell above the door jingled, announcing someone's arrival. I didn't pay much attention at first, but then I felt it. A subtle shift in the air, a feeling that made me look up. She was standing at the counter, ordering her coffee. She had this quiet confidence about her, the kind of person who didn't need to stand out to be noticed. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her eyes, they were intense, like they carried more weight than they should. But what caught my attention most was the scar on her left hand. Barely visible, but there nonetheless. I don't know why I noticed that scar. Maybe because I had my own, invisible and deep. Or maybe it was because it made her seem human, not perfect. She sat down at the table across from mine, not looking my way. I tried to focus back on my book, but I could feel her presence, like a tug in the air. I wasn't interested, not really. But something about her, something unspoken, kept pulling my attention. I thought about leaving. I had no reason to stay, no reason to entertain any thoughts of meeting someone new. But as the minutes ticked by, something inside me urged me to speak up. "Excuse me," I heard my own voice say before I could stop myself. She looked up, her brow slightly raised, as if surprised I'd approached her. "Yeah. I hope I'm not interrupting," I said, suddenly feeling foolish, my words unsure. But I couldn't help but notice that scar on your hand. Her eyes softened, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear before looking down at her hand. "Ah," she said quietly, as if recalling something long ago. "It's from a long time ago. Lesson I learned the hard way." I smiled, though it was bittersweet. "A lesson, huh? One you won't forget, I'm guessing?" She nodded, her lips curling into a slight smile. "Something like that." There was a brief, comfortable silence between us. I wasn't sure what I expected, but there was a warmth in her presence, a sense of shared understanding that I didn't often find with strangers. "I'm Mike," I said, deciding to keep it simple. "Rebecca," she replied. We exchanged a few more words, casual and easy, as though we were two people who'd known each other for years, rather than strangers who'd just met. We talked about small things, the weather, the coffee, books we were reading, and eventually about our lives. But as she spoke, I could sense something deeper beneath her words. She wasn't talking about the things that truly mattered to her. Her stories were short, fragments, like pieces of a larger puzzle she didn't want to put together just yet. I knew that feeling all too well. I told her about my move, about how I had left behind a past I could never forget, about the things I had lost. And strangely, it felt good to talk. It felt like, for once, I wasn't carrying all of my pain alone. She listened carefully, nodding in understanding. "Sounds like you've been through a lot," she said quietly. I shrugged, a half smile tugging at my lips. "I guess we all go through something, right?" Her eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of something, recognition, maybe. "Yeah," she replied softly. "We do." The conversation drifted, and before I knew it, hours had passed. The shop had emptied out, leaving just the two of us. There was no rush, no pressure. When she stood up to leave, I found myself reluctant to let go of the moment. I wasn't sure if I'd ever see her again, but I knew that something had shifted, that I had found a moment of connection that was rare. "Hey," I said as she grabbed her jacket. "Would you like to grab dinner sometime?" She smiled, and it was genuine, warm. "I'd like that." She gave me a small nod, and then she was gone. I sat there for a few minutes, digesting everything. I didn't know what it meant, what this encounter would lead to, but for the first time in a long time I felt the possibility of something new, something real. I had no idea if Rebecca was the answer to the emptiness I'd been feeling, but I didn't care. Right now, all I knew was that I wasn't alone anymore, and that was enough to start with. The weeks following that evening in the coffee shop were strange. The connection I'd felt with Rebecca lingered, a quiet hum in the background of my life. I wasn't ready to dive into anything. After everything I'd been through, I couldn't just jump into something new without wondering if I was truly ready. But, at the same time, I couldn't ignore the way she made me feel. I wasn't looking for love or even companionship, not in the way I had with Jennifer. That part of me, the naive part, had been buried. But Rebecca, she was different. There was something about her calm presence, the way she listened without judgment, that made me feel like I wasn't as broken as I'd thought. We met a few times, casually at first. Lunches in quiet corners of the city, walks in the park, talking about everything and nothing. We never rushed anything. It was easy to be around her. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other, each step forward a little more comfortable than the last. But there was something unsettling about the whole situation. As I got closer to Rebecca, I started realizing how much I was still carrying with me, how much I hadn't fully processed. I kept finding myself comparing her to Jennifer, which I knew wasn't fair. She wasn't Jennifer, and I wasn't the same person I had been when I was with her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at a crossroads, torn between the past and the future. Rebecca had become the symbol of what I could have, of the life I could build if I let go of the bitterness. But letting go wasn't easy. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself standing outside my apartment building, staring at the ground, unsure of what to do. I knew I had to make a decision, to either open up and let myself move forward or stay trapped in the pain of the past. It wasn't until I saw a message from Rebecca that I made up my mind. It was simple. "Hey, I'm thinking of you. Hope you're doing okay. Would love to see you tonight if you're free." Her words were kind, but there was a hint of uncertainty in them. I couldn't tell if she was waiting for me to take the next step or if she was testing the waters, just as I had been. I typed back a quick response. "I'd like that. I'll meet you in an hour." As I walked to the small bistro where we'd agreed to meet, I felt the familiar weight of uncertainty settle in. I had been here before, the feeling of standing on the edge of something unknown, unsure whether to jump or turn back. When I arrived, Rebecca was already seated, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. She waved, and I couldn't help but smile. There was something about her that made everything feel lighter. We talked over dinner, but the conversation felt different tonight. There was an undercurrent to it, a tension that hadn't been there before. We both skirted around the subject of our pasts, unsure how much to reveal. I could tell that Rebecca, too, was carrying her own weight. Finally, she broke the silence. "Mike," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "I don't want to rush anything, but I feel like we're both holding back, like we're afraid of something." "Are you afraid of me?" I paused, considering her question. Was I afraid of her? Of what she represented? I wasn't sure, but there was something about her openness that made me feel vulnerable. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not afraid of you. I think I'm afraid of what happens next. I don't know if I'm ready to move on from the past, from everything that happened before." She looked at me with a kind, understanding expression. "Mike, no one can force you to move on, but you don't have to stay stuck in the past either. You deserve to live again, to love again, when you're ready." Her words hung in the air, a challenge I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. "I know," I replied quietly, "but I don't know if I can trust anyone again. I don't know if I can love again." Rebecca reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. Don't shut yourself off from the possibility of something new, even if it's scary." I looked into her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the walls I'd built around myself start to crumble, just a little. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe I've been holding on to the wrong things for too long." We didn't speak much after that, but there was a shift between us, a silent understanding that things were changing. Slowly but surely. As I walked home that night, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something. Maybe it wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was the beginning of a journey toward healing, toward trusting again. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. Time has a strange way of making things clearer, though at times, it also clouds your judgment even more. The days that followed my dinner with Rebecca felt like a blur. I was still unsure about how to navigate the space between my past and whatever this connection with her might turn into. Every time I saw her, every time we spoke, I was reminded of how much I had buried beneath layers of anger and hurt. She was gentle with me, understanding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running from something. But running was what I had been doing for years. I'd been avoiding the rawness of my emotions, the vulnerability that had come with my marriage to Jennifer and the devastation that followed. How do you let someone in again when you've already been burned so badly? It wasn't that I didn't care about Rebecca. On the contrary, there was something in her that made me feel alive again, something real that I hadn't realized I was missing. But there were still days when I would sit alone in my apartment, staring at the empty walls, wondering if I could ever allow someone into my life without the shadow of my past hanging over us. I decided to take some time for myself. No dates, no distractions, just me. I needed to really think about what I wanted, about what I was ready for. I had spent too long trying to move on for the wrong reasons, too long thinking that healing meant filling the emptiness with another person. But that wasn't the answer. The answer had to come from within me. It was on a quiet Sunday morning that I finally understood. I had been so focused on finding closure from Jennifer, on confronting the ghost of what she had done to me, that I hadn't fully confronted the most important question. What did I need? I needed peace. I needed to stop looking back at a life that was never coming back, at a woman who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I needed to stop holding on to the anger that had driven me for so long, because it had only been hurting me. As much as I cared for Rebecca, I couldn't ask her to be my redemption. I couldn't expect her to fix the wounds that Jennifer had left behind. That was something I had to do on my own. It was time to make the final choice, to let go of the past, once and for all, and start living for myself. I called Rebecca that afternoon, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea how she would react, but I knew what I needed to say. Rebecca, I think I've been holding myself back from something I'm not ready for, I said, my voice steady despite the uncertainty that flooded my thoughts. There was silence on the other end. Then, she spoke, soft and understanding. Mike, you don't have to explain yourself. I get it. I want you to be happy, in whatever way that looks like. I appreciate you, I said, my throat tightening. But I can't do this. Not right now. I need to figure things out for myself before I can truly open up to anyone else. Especially you. Her voice was gentle, but there was a trace of disappointment. I understand. I really do. Just know that if you ever change your mind, I'll be here. And with that, we ended the call. It wasn't easy. Walking away from the potential of something new, something that had felt so raw and genuine, was painful. But I knew it was the right thing to do. I couldn't start something fresh without truly healing from the past first. The next few weeks were a blur of reflection. I spent time working on myself, going to therapy, writing in my journal, reconnecting with old friends. Slowly, I began to let go of the bitterness, the resentment. I allowed myself to feel sadness, to mourn the person I had once been, the life I thought I would have. And then, one day, it hit me. I didn't need to keep looking back. The person I had been, broken, angry, afraid, was gone. And in his place was someone new, someone stronger. Someone who had learned from his mistakes and was ready to move forward. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to punish anyone. I didn't even need closure from Jennifer. What I needed was to live for me. As the days went by, I started seeing the world differently. I started living for the present, not the past. And in doing so, I found a kind of peace that I hadn't even known I was searching for. I didn't know what the future would bring. Maybe I'd find love again. Maybe I wouldn't. But I knew one thing for sure. I had finally stopped running. I had stopped being a victim to my own past. And that, in itself, was enough. When you're caught in the aftermath of betrayal, it feels like your whole world is crashing down. But time and the choices you make can bring you back to yourself. Healing isn't about finding someone else to fix you. It's about realizing that you can rebuild, piece by piece, until you're whole again. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt trapped by your past, I want you to know something: you have the power to choose. You can let go, you can move forward, and you can start a new chapter in your life. It may not be easy, and it may take time, but it's worth it. If you found any piece of the story meaningful, if it made you reflect on your own life, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've been following this journey, don't forget to subscribe. The road to healing is a long one, but we're in it together.